All right. Hello to everyone. Good afternoon from the Broadcast Center downtown Toronto. I'm Devin Heroux, and good afternoon and good evening to some of you wherever this finds you, and good morning to people on the West Coast. As you can see, we have a jam-packed row of panelists here today on an important day, an important conversation, and I'm honored and humbled to be a part of this all today. Before I begin, I want to say thank you to Monica, Raju, and Sarah with the Global Initiative for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Curling. I started about 6 months ago, established to make the sport we all love more inclusive by drawing on the expertise of so many of our members. So thank you to the three of you for involving me in today. Here we are, another day of International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. And I specifically say another, somewhat sarcastically, because at CBC, as a journalist, when I tweet about this, when I report on this important day, we've got dogs in the house, you would be somewhat horrified, maybe not surprised at the emails, direct messages, comments that I get about why are we still marking this day? Why is this day still important? And we'll hear from our panelists today about why it is so important. So we'll hear compelling stories on the ice and off the ice, people who have lived some of that hate that I talked about. We have allies here as well. So it's an important conversation. This year's theme, Together, Resisting, Supporting, and Healing. And I just want to talk a quick second before we get to Elena Stern in Switzerland about that last part for me that really resonates for me, the healing part about this. It was, I guess it was 16 years ago now, I came out publicly as a sports editor of the University of Saskatchewan newspaper growing up in Saskatoon. And I look at that time in my life, 18 years old, not knowing what the hell I was doing, trying to find a sense of belonging in a city and in a province that isn't always welcoming to LGBTQ plus members. And so when I think about healing on this day, I think there are still parts of me that's healing to this day, and I'm working through all of that. And so I know many of us on this panel will share some of those similar experiences today, but an important conversation, an important day, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Quick little last thing on how I became a journalist and not a curler. I had dreams of one day becoming a professional curler. My claim to fame is that I won 2 high school city championships in Saskatoon. The other part of it is that while I was confronting my own sexuality and curling in high school, it was only years after those experiences that I learned that the skip of our team was also going through that same experience. We ended up finding that out by going to the only gay nightclub in Saskatoon called Divas, and we did that sort of, wait, what, huh? You, me? Nah. I say that because we were both sort of in our own way suffering in silence. We were rooming together on the road. We were showing up at practice every day, and we were carrying the burden of our secret on and off the ice. And it breaks my heart to think about the fact that we couldn't share those experiences together and be there for one another in our time of need. And it inextricably shapes who you are as a person. And so let's get into it today. I told all our panelists today that I implore them to be bold and brave because they are courageous and they are making a difference in all of their areas of interaction. And so let's have a little bit of radical conversation today and get into it and be vulnerable and brave and authentic. And so with that, let's get started with Elena Stern, the skip of Team Stern, the 2020 Swiss champions. Elena, it's nice to see you. You're in Zurich today. How are you? And thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm good.
Great. In preparation for our conversation, Elena, we got you to share a little bit about your journey. I was specifically interested and caught by your journey, and you sharing that when rumors of your sexuality started to swirl, it was the first time you felt like you had to confront and publicize your sexuality. Can you walk us through a little bit of that journey and what that was like for you?
Yeah, that was not the easiest time for me because I was at a point in my life where I still was kind of unsure about who I was and who I want to love in the future. And I was just so in my own thoughts, but still those rumors started going, and I knew that I wasn't fitting the norm. I knew that, but I didn't really want to give it a label yet. But still, knowing that everyone was talking about it, it really pushed me to, I have to justify this. I owe people an explanation, but I had a lot of great people who always reassured me, you don't owe anyone an explanation, and you are yourself, and take your time, and take that time to find out who you are, and you don't need to give yourself a label right now. And I was really grateful for that.
It is such a personal journey, but yet you had this outside pressure weighing down on you. How does that affect you? People always say, why do we need to have these conversations? And I wonder if you can tell us sort of tangibly how that affected you both in life and in curling, always knowing in the back of your mind that that was there, that people might be thinking these things.
Yeah, I just added to the stress level I already have, just life in general, work, and then curling, and that's a lot of stress, and I think everyone here knows that, and that's just an additional factor that adds to stress in life. And I don't think people are aware what they do to others when they start talking like that, because those people who are talking about that are usually not the ones who have to justify themselves or have to open up about their sexuality, because it's just normal. And I was really impressed by that, like how much additional stress this added to me. And I feel like everyone deals with it differently, but for me, it added a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Elena, what do you think it would have meant to you to have been able to do this on your own timeline, on your own journey, to work through the things that you were confronting? Because it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your journey was sort of sped up because of this outside pressure. What do you think it would have meant to you in sort of a natural sort of progression of reconciling and coming to terms with all of this? How big a difference that would have made?
It would have certainly made a difference, but then again, I'm not complaining at all. I feel like I was a very blessed with people who really supported me, so I wasn't struggling that much, but still it would have taken a lot of the pressure off of me, and it would have given me time to not feel like an outsider. I felt like an outsider for the longest time, and this just added to that feeling like something's not right with you. People are talking about that, and I feel like that would have given me more peace and more love for myself as well.
You curl at the highest level. You're a Swiss champion. I know the atmosphere of sport and LGBTQ plus issues in sport in Canada. Can you shed a little bit of light on what the atmosphere and environment is around this in Switzerland?
I feel like it's an okay atmosphere. People are not talking about it a lot. There is not much visibility, like not in a bad and not in a good sense. And this is also a reason why I'm here today, because I really want to add to that visibility, because I feel like it's very important, and also to share my story to others who might be struggling with the same things, to really tell them to take their time and do everything at their own speed and whatever they feel comfortable with, and also to take away the fear of being open about the sexuality, because I really was scared, and that was also a factor that added a lot of pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself. So the community is so welcoming, and everyone is so kind, and we have great allies that support us, and that's so important to know, and I wish I had known that earlier.
Let's pick up on that, the fear of the unknown more than anything, of how are people going to respond to this. And I think sometimes in our mind we build it up to this big scary thing, and then we're in some cases surprised by the response. Who were the people who had your back, who were supporting you, and what did that mean to you? Because I reflect back to that 16, 17-year-old searching kid on the ice in Saskatoon. I had no representation or visibility. And so thank you, Elena, and all our panelists for speaking today, because that representation, isn't it crucial?
Yeah, so I was really lucky. I had a lot of people who had my back. My family has known for a long time, and they have always been so supportive, and they really were great. And I had some friends who also knew, and they supported me always. And also at work, I had some people who know, and without them, I don't think I could be here today with that confidence and share my story. So yeah, I'm so grateful for everyone who was there with me and still is.
We talk about allies a lot. We have allies on this call today. What advice, Elena, would you have to allies watching today? How can they create space for people who are on their journey? I always talk about the power of words, and for people who are coming to terms with their sexuality, we're always ears open, listening to where safe spaces are. What do you say to allies who are watching today, who want to be there and support?
I feel like maybe everyone is different, but what really helped me is hearing from allies too, that I don't owe an explanation. That was the one thing that I heard a lot, and that helped me most, because I really felt like I had to explain myself. And just people who listened to my thoughts and really told me, you are okay the way you are, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, but I'm here if you want to talk. That really helped me the most.
Beautiful. I love that. I want to end here with a beautiful quote. I might take it from you or use it in one of my stories. It's beautiful, Elena. Listen to this. Elena says, I realized it still seems to be a big deal to people who you love. And I really hope that in the future, it will be as normal as choosing red, yellow, or blue rocks. Beautiful, Elena. Any last words, any last thoughts? Thank you so much for sharing your story today.
I just want to thank everyone who's here also listening. And I'm really grateful that an opportunity like this exists and that people are open to listen to all of us. And I also want to thank my girlfriend, who has just really been my biggest supporter those past few months. And I'm just really grateful to have her. I know she's listening right now, and I'm just really glad that I have her.
Beautiful. Outstanding, Elena. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate you today. Let's go from the Swiss champ to San Francisco and talk to Jonathan Otoko. I understand, Jonathan, that this was going to be a little 5-week endeavor into the curling world, and 10 years later, you're still hooked in the way that curling does that to us. But Jonathan, maybe well, let's start by saying welcome to you, hello to you, how are you, and maybe just share a little bit about your journey in curling.
Sure, and thanks for everyone participating in this today. I think this is such an important topic to cover, especially in the sport of curling, which I found to be very inclusive and opening. So it is true. I started curling because my brother started curling, and he lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. So this was, he and his wife, my husband and I went out to his club to just sort of try it out, and it was fun. And then I thought I would take lessons when I got back home. And I think I had to wait a year before lessons were available. But then when I took them, they were only available on Fridays. And I told my husband that this will only affect our weekends now for 5 weeks to play on a Friday. And then I kept playing. So it definitely changed, our schedules and our lives, but it's brought so much joy in my life. And it's a great fun thing to do on a Friday night. And so that's how I've always viewed curling, as this recreational event, this recreational activity, this incredibly social activity. And I guess for me, I mean, in terms of curling, I guess because so many of the instructors here in San Francisco, some of them were gay, and being openly gay wasn't even it didn't even cross my mind not to. But I will say, I mean, I've now played at, I've played at Arena Nationals and at the Pacific International Cup where I did meet people who were gay there, but weren't out. So I don't know how, I guess because I talk a lot, that people came up to me during some of the events and they would just talk to me about this. So, but that's been my journey. I mean, to me, curling is still just a fun activity. I think it can be a place to meet people, just in general. And I've found great support from my curling family here in San Francisco.
Interesting to hear you say, Jonathan, that people came up to you who weren't out. What were those conversations like? Because for you, it seems like a really positive experience, but we know it's not the same for everyone. So what were those conversations like?
It was really just asking me about, what was it like? Sometimes it was a little uncomfortable because I also knew one of them was married and I'd met his wife. So that was a little uncomfortable, but I just, I think I just gave him a few minutes. He talked and I talked for a few minutes and that was it. And then, it was, I don't know if it did anything for him, but I think it was just unusual for him from where he was from to actually meet anyone that was gay. So
I want to pick up on you're talking about so many of the instructors in the Bay Area are gay. And so you go in there and you have this built-in support system and you don't have to think twice about your being gay in this space. So if we apply that to clubs and communities everywhere,
sure.
I mean, that probably meant a lot to you, did it not?
It did. It absolutely. It absolutely did. I mean, it made it easier to just be able to be open about what's going on in your life when you're talking to your team, when you're traveling with them to Bonspiels. It's also part of the reason why I also help run the MOPAC 5 and under here in the West Coast. So this is a Bonspiel for people 5 years or less. Right. And it was one of the things that I wanted to do when I helped run it, was just to be very open. And it's amazing how many people are gay or lesbian who have come through, who I've met through that experience. Like I've met Laura at one of these 5 and unders that I was helping run. So I think it's really important to be out and open at a lot of these events, because you just don't know if someone is struggling with an issue or with anything. And if they can see someone who's just there trying to make sure everyone's having a good time, that they can come and talk to you and maybe get some support that they might need, or maybe some strength to find it for themselves in the future.
Sounds like if you're a LGBTQ plus curler, you want to be in the Bay Area. Jonathan, tell me about the atmosphere where you are. We heard from Elena. I said I know, and we're going to get into it in the situation in Canada, but from your perspective, it seems like there's a strong community there and a diverse community there. We hear about curling being this most inclusive sport. I'm going to push back on that a little bit today, because there's parts I think we can improve, certainly, but just give me a sense of how you feel it is. And I think you guys are doing some really creative things to bring in diverse groups of people there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the San Francisco Club, I mean, one of the things we did is we marched in the Pride event here. And we had a booth, and we really tried to sort of diversify the membership. So we did Learn to Curls, and there were clearly some people who came from the Learn to Curl, from Pride, that came to Learn to Curls. I don't think that many of them transitioned to full-time curlers, but I think they still had a good time learning about it. I think one of the things that you're about in terms of inclusivity is I will say that the racial and ethnic makeup of curlers in general it could be improved. I know when my team, who was non-white, went to Arena Nationals, we noticed it right away that in the team photo, there's us and there's everyone else, basically. And I know part of that is just the demographics, but I think in every city around the country, they were all from major cities, that there could be more you know, reaching out to various communities to help increase diversity.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Jonathan, because yesterday when we all got together to prepare about how we wanted to talk about today, the intersectionality of all of these things.
Sure.
I don't think you can talk about one thing and not include the other, and we're going to get into it as well with Dr. Richard Norman. But it gets back to that representation, doesn't it?
Yep.
And you know, I wrote a paper last summer with Rich Norman in there about curling being a very white sport. That is a fact. And so when you mention that and showing up at these events, it's interesting to hear your reflections on what that meant to you and how do we tackle that? Where do we begin with that, Jonathan? Big question.
Big question. I don't know if I doubt there's an easy solution. I know that all you can do is make sure the atmosphere is inclusive. It doesn't shut up, doesn't make anyone feel like they should not be there. I think part of it is attracting just younger people to come into curling, I think will help. Because I think even the Bay Area has, I think the average age is relatively young. And I think throughout California, the average age of a curler is relatively young compared to the rest of the United States. And I think as compared to Canada as well. So when I go to Bonspiels in Minnesota, for example, it's incredibly different than when I'm at a Bonspiel in California. It's part of it is the demographics of who's just in the curling. But I think more outreach events like what we did with Pride, you can certainly go to different events to try to promote curling. I mean, I grew up in Texas, so some of the big events is like a Juneteenth event and a big, maybe a curling booth there, or there's so many different events that you could possibly go to try to increase diversity.
Outstanding. Great work, Jonathan. Thank you for being here today, and so glad your 5-week experiment turned into, I'm going to say it's going to be a lifetime thing for you. And we're better for it with you as a part of this sport. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
We're moving on to the CEO of Curling Canada, Kathy Henderson. And Kathy, I see you taking notes very carefully over there because I know you're working hard. And first of all, congratulations on all the work out of the bubble, the curling bubble that I know people attending and watching, and the panelists, we were all glued. Some took part in it. We were consumed. So congratulations to you, Kathy. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Great, yeah, thanks. It's really good. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into it because I had mentioned the story from last summer when we talked about a lack of diversity in curling, and I know Curling Canada was taking a very close look at that. Can you tell me about some of the things you've done? Because I know you've been such an advocate for equity, gender equity in the sport. What other things is Curling Canada doing, Kathy?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there's even a few people on this panel today that were good enough to come and sit down and talk to me. So just, there was a lot of things going on in the world that made me kind of push the pause button, and that's before the pandemic pause button, to ask ourselves, you know, I think curling for many years has prided itself on being very inclusive, and I would agree. I think once you're in the door, it's a very inclusive place and people are welcome with open arms. But my question continued to be, how are we getting people to that door? You know, there's still a door and you've got to get them through it. And once they're inside, you know, they really do need to feel welcomed. So we started off with a group of people, and it was really just people. Many of them put their hand up and said, I want to talk to you about this, Kathy. So we pulled everyone together and we spent a number of meetings. So everyone, I spent one-on-one with them, or two-on-one. I had Al Cameron, our media person, with me, and we talked to them. We talked to them really just about their experiences, who they are as people, very much the things that we're talking about right here today. And I was just incredibly grateful at how honest people were. People told me some stories that really pained me. You know, they pained me as a sister and a mother and a human being when I listened to painful things that people had gone through, that I thought, you know, I might not have thought about that. Anyway, we spent a lot of time one-on-one with people, and then we all got together a number of times and we started to just think through lots and lots of ideas. And what I did is I had the group, I put together a set of ideas And a lot of people, I would call them, encouraged us to go forward with that. And one of the things I was quite conscious of is to say, you have given me the gift of understanding. It is not up to you to do these things. That's my job. I thank you for your help, but if someone's going to do the heavy lifting here, it's going to be us. So we've started down that path. Dr. Richard Norman was really helpful. There's a ton of people, so I don't want to go through everybody, but we've done a number of things. First of all, we did a diversity survey in our own organizations. We've taken everybody in the organization through diversity training. We have very good diversity policies. We've got, but I want to come back to that thing about training and policies. We've done it with our member associations because 99.99% of people at Curl in Canada do not curl on the national team. So I have incredible control over what people are learning and thinking in terms of how we educate them at the national level. But really, we need to drive this into the clubs. So we did have a group of people that started to work with a group of diversity experts, and we just launched on the International Day to End Racial Discrimination. We prepared materials for all clubs, and we are offering clubs diversity training and also marketing, like how to get out there and really start to market to groups that maybe have not felt as welcome to come forward. We continue with Rocks and Rings. For those of you that aren't in Canada, you wouldn't know this, but we bring curling to the gym floor. And I think it was Jonathan that said, you really need to get to young people. We take 8-year-olds through curling, and we've done over it's getting close to 2 million kids over the last 6 or 7 years. And we're seeing incredible movement. And we're actually seeing, before the pandemic, super big growth amongst young people wanting to try the sport and showing up at the clubs and whatnot. I did want to go back to I know I'm talking a lot and you probably want to ask me a question, but I know people kind of roll their eyes when you say education and policy, but it has to go beyond that. So, I can implement these things. But the thing is, at Curling Canada, we've asked everyone to do is not just sign off or say I've read the policy, but is to be very intentional and really have hard conversations about what does this mean in your day-to-day interactions when you're working with Curling Canada.
And I do have questions, Kathy. So, and that was one of the things I wanted to push you on a little bit as the national sport organization that oversees this, that of course has an eye on high performance. What do you imagine your role to be in those grassroots? Because you're right, the clubs in small town Saskatchewan and all parts of this country are the lifeblood of this game. And as the national governing sport body, what do you imagine your role to affect enough change at that level where it matters most? What do you believe your role to be?
I think there's a couple of things. It's a really good question. I promise not to be long-winded about it. One is I think we can offer people. A lot of people don't know where to start. They know they want to be more inclusive, but they don't really know what that means. And I think we can start kind of putting some a framework around that to really help people to say, this is what an inclusive environment feels like to people who have felt excluded. It's to be able to transition a little bit of that experience to them, and then to help show them pathways to get to places where they need to be. I think the second thing is, as you said, representation. We have the ability to show the most curling to the most people in Canada, and is really to start to allow the athletes to speak their story and to show these incredible, like world-class athletes to the rest of the world, but really be able to show them a bit more as human beings. I think, just as time has gone, we've tended to concentrate very much on people's, statistics and skills and shot making and whatnot, but is to really start to profile them as human beings and let them tell the world, what they want to tell about themselves, and then support them, when they do.
Right. I mean, that I was going to pick up on that is the intentionality around that. And, hearing Elena and hearing Jonathan, and we'll hear from other panelists here too, about for people who have privilege, walking into a club and seeing things and hearing things, we don't even think twice about it.
Yeah.
For minority groups, BIPOC groups, walking into a curling club, how do we be intentional about making these spaces? And when we're showing the highest level of curling on TV, as much as any other sport in Canada. How do we be intentional about creating spaces for everyone when they're watching it hour after hour, like they have over the last couple of months, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, Devin, I mean, having conversations like this is really important, and you've been huge in this area, so kudos. I mean, and I watched your curling show, and I listen, I follow your tweets, and I listen to the conversations you have, and I ruefully sometimes read papers that you write and think, wow, we could be doing a hell of a lot better. So I think, calling it out and making sure that everybody's really aware, hey, Kathy, hey, Curling Canada, there are people out there that don't feel included, is it's sometimes hard, but it's things that we all need to listen to.
Kathy, I appreciate that. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So those are really good things. I think, as you said, when we work with clubs, I've yet to meet a club that didn't say, I want to have tons of people curling. I want everybody happy. I want people, buying beer and chicken wings and, having a great Friday night. I have yet to hear a club to say to me, that is not what I want. What they do say is, I've had a very traditional marketing scheme in the past, and I seem to be attracting the same people over and over again. Can you help me? And we've said, we can. We can help you. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't market into your clubs. The Saskatoon Curling Club, we can't go in and do the things that they want to do. But what we can certainly do is provide them with the information, the education, the policy, the training, all the things that they need to say, there's a huge, beautiful world of people that really want to curl out there. Here's some ways to make your club more inclusive. Here's some ways to bring in people that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And, make sure the ice is great. Make sure the beer is cold. Make sure the chicken wings are spicy, or, whatever it is, or sometimes make sure that there's a kosher item on the menu, or there's a vegetarian item on the menu. Those are some of the things that we do. Make sure that, we talk to them about their bathrooms and what they call them. And, we talk to people about pronouns and all kinds of things. And we say, just keep those things in mind as you are marketing your club. And we promise, not only are you going to have a better experience, there's a better business model in it too.
And I promise you, I'm not going away, nor is my critical edge. And so I appreciate you, Kathy, really and truly, because it is a collective effort, no doubt. I know you know that. And so you didn't have to be here today. And so I appreciate you being here. I know you're working hard. And again, congratulations on the bubble experience. And I know we've got a curling game right now with Canada and Spain at the Mixed Doubles World Championship. So one more event, but thank you for being here today, Kathy.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Let's move on to Dr. Rich Norman, somebody who also has a critical eye. And I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Norman last summer, studying curling, perhaps a lack of diversity in curling very closely. And we got into it, and this took off. And so, Dr. Norman, it's great to see you. Where do we want to begin? What's on your mind today, Dr. Norman?
Yeah, that's a good question, Devin. Really pleasure to be here. Humbled to be associated with everybody on the panel. I guess the first thing I'd like to comment on, even the tagline for what this International Day is about. When you talked about healing, and for me, I think there is, particularly in this COVID time, the stress, that Elena was talking about, has just been exacerbated. Mental health issues are really important. So, when you're then, dealing with other kinds of, perhaps trauma, perhaps, questioning lots of different things, I think that we really have to be aware that this is a very difficult I don't know even how to describe what this period of our lives are. And to really make note that I think that even when we're moving back out, let's say that, everyone's vaccinated, I think that, remembering that there are going to be really repercussions from this is really important to understand.
The trauma of it, the trauma that so many people are experiencing, and everybody's going through their own journeys right now, and also confronting things perhaps that we were distracted by in the busyness of life, or could just look the other way because it was easier to. What are you looking at and focusing on? You joke about the fact that you don't know how the hell you ended up in the curling world, but you're in it now. You've taken a critical look at it. Can you tell us a little bit about your research and some of those impactful stories? Because I know you talked to a lot of people who were very candid with you.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate this kind of conversation, and I was really interested. I got connected into curling and through a friend, many of whom you all know, and there's been such a lasting impression of this world, the social connections that I have. I mean, Sarah's on this call. She was one of the first curlers that I've ever met at that level, and just the friendships that I have. So I'm embedded in the sport. I do have skin in the game, even though that I'm not a curler. And so my research was really trying to understand from the perspective of people who are in the sport, and part of that, quote unquote, dominant culture, what are the things that we're missing? And I think that that's, carries over into conversations like today of, I'm thinking of it more of sport in general. I mean, the lack of commentary on homophobia and transphobia, what is happening with Caster Semenya, all of these kinds of issues are sort of just, they're add-ons. And I think that what I'd really love to see within sport in general, and curling can have a really big, important role in that, is actually changing those narratives so that it's not an add-on. That's actually, it's a multiplicity. It's a pluriversal way of understanding what the cultures are in sport. So it's not just a male-dominated, heteronormative, representation.
Why are we so afraid to get into these conversations from your perspective? You're not afraid. You're getting into those uncomfortable places. You're interrogating yourself all the time and having tough conversations. Why are we so afraid to engage in these conversations?
Oh, well, I don't think we have enough time for really getting into that one. But what I would say is, I think that Canada, from my perspective and what I research, we don't like to talk about race. Race is something that we've already handled. Racial tolerance, multiculturalism is part of, the mystique of what Canadians are. And I think that we need to dislodge that to really interrogate that properly so that we can have conversations about, well, why do we have to think about representation? Why do we have to think about extending that out? And I think that goes to other groups that have been pushed to the margins as well, that it just, regardless of how Canada presents itself, that we need to start to dismantle that and to think about these questions differently. So I don't really have an answer to why we don't want to engage in it. I just know that we don't. And I think that, this past year has really shown us that when we start to engage in these conversations, things start to shift, things start to change. So that's why I think this panel is great, and all the work that everyone is doing here.
Last question for you, Dr. Norman, because we could go on very long. When you talk about groups pushed to the margins, what are sort of the parallels in your research that you've seen on the negative effects and some of the discourse around these groups that sort of tie it all together? I talked about the intersectionality of all of it, and that I think we're in an elevated level of conversation now where you can't talk about one without the other. What are sort of the parallels and the fibers that tie this all together from your perspective?
Yeah, I think intersectionality is a really valuable, theoretical framework to look at these kinds of issues, because you can interrogate things critically from multiple perspectives. So not only looking at, trying to dismantle heteronormativity, but also, racial biases and systemic racism at the same time, to come up with different understandings. And so that's why it's really powerful. One of the challenges I think of intersectionality is that, how far do we want to go of taking somebody's identity and dismantling it? So I think that we have to be a bit cautious that we don't lose that, in fact, everybody who's involved in this are human beings. Identities are very complex. So, as much as I think that it's a really valuable tool, and we need to be able to interrogate those different systems that are upholding things and pushing people to the margins, that, what I really want to see in the future is creative solutions, which just get back to the humanity of everybody and what that could be.
it can be as complex and yet so simple of reminding the humanity that exists within all of us. Rich, where can we read some of your work?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, my dissertation is available. You go for it. I'll say that. I have some panel discussions coming up via Ryerson and the Ted Rogers School of Management. And, there will be stuff in the future coming out, but, that's it for now.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned is what he's telling. Rich, it's great to see you. Thank you for that. Let's keep it moving. 2018 Olympic champion, somebody we know well, John Schuster. John, it's great to see you. How are you? Where are you today, and how are things your way?
I'm sitting in my kitchen. Life is good.
Good. John, you wanted to be here today. Thank you for being here today. Can you share a little bit about your journey and why you felt it important to be here today?
Yeah, I think within the past year, since we've had a lot of diversity and inclusion things happening in the States, some major things that kind of started with racial issues and I mean honestly it has expanded into everything, has really helped me in the last year really think about who I am as a person, who I want to be, in support of of those maybe people that I've always accepted, but I wanted to be more than just somebody who accepts people for who they are. I want to be here to be able to support them as well, and so as part of the USA Curling National Team Diversity and Inclusion panel, along with Monica, who's on the panel here. Yeah, I've learned a lot in the last year about, I think of what I can do personally to not just be accepting of everybody in the world, but to also be supportive and to help advance, the curling world down a path of a place where I've always felt like a curling club was a place where everybody was welcome and included, and honestly excited to. I'm always excited to see every single person in the curling club, and I hope that everybody always feels the same way when they walk into a curling club, that everybody's excited that they're there.
So walk me through that a little bit, John, because you said you want to do more than just be welcoming. And can you walk me through that a little bit? Because you don't have to do this. We've come to know who you are. You're candid. I appreciate that. You're authentic. But you want to take it further. And picking up on what Rich just said is, not engaging in these conversations, not challenging our beliefs or the way we've thought about things. And it sounds like you're in a place where you're wanting to do that. So can you walk me through that a little bit?
I think where it really got to me was is we have an athlete who's not a curling athlete at the time, is a weightlifter, JC Cooper, who competed in the USA Juniors and won a junior men's national championship as Joel Cooper, and JC came on incredibly bravely in where she thought that the curling community and where she grew up wasn't a place that was welcoming, or where she felt that she could, become herself, which she made that transition afterwards. And some of the things that she mentioned to us about, even the language that was used around the curling community and in the junior men's area and around curling clubs, and was not a place where she felt was going to be accepting, and she actually gave up the sport. And it was in that vulnerable place that she was, where she gave up the sport she loved, and I could think of how that had to feel, because I obviously love curling and as much as she does, and I realized probably in that hour that she spent with us that this was something that I wanted to make sure that I hope that nobody ever has to make that decision because of a group that I'm in or part of ever again. And yeah, so here we are.
Were you aware of what she was going through?
I mean, I was aware because I realized that she disappeared from our community, and so but I wasn't aware of the pain that was going on inside of, obviously her heart and what that was. So yeah, it was was definitely something that made me search back, and yeah, and there were words that existed in young people, you know, in America, and especially the small town, non-diverse area I grew up in, that were part of our language that now, you know, I've worked very, very hard to not only take that out of my language, but to bring up, you know, those certain, you know, words that are out there. And that's not just, you know, I have a niece who has pretty severe cerebral palsy, and the R word is a word that I use probably enough times where I've, you know, felt very ashamed down the road, and I just that was kind of the beginning of realizing what kind of things that, you know, words can do, you know, to others.
John, were you aware of the power, the weight that those words carried, or is it through all of these experiences recently where you're fully coming to terms with the weight of those words?
You know, I think I was growing up, and I know the weight that words carry, and maybe that's why this has really struck a chord with me. When I was like in 5th grade, I had a surgery where I whatever it was, and I was limping around school, and I remember you know, somebody being like, oh, they cut off one of his testicles, and thought it was funny to all of a sudden like call me Uno. And from in 5th grade for 4 straight years, I had to deal with people whispering it, saying it to my face and around there, and realize the power of words. I mean, it was something that, you know, I lived through and as a kid, and I think that was probably the beginning of that understanding. And I think as I've grown up and now have kids of my own who my wife and I have, you know, we make every effort to introduce them to as much diversity, and you know, if our kids have questions about why is that person in a wheelchair, you know, or why, you know, is, you know, that person short, or you know, we think that should be, we look forward to the day that hopefully when they have their kids, that, you know, those aren't even really questions that they probably have to talk about.
Lastly, John, and I always appreciate your authenticity whenever we have a conversation. What would you say to people who maybe have never had experiences because of their privilege where they had to interrogate what words mean, or just the little things that can have a profound difference in people's lives? What would you say? Because you have a platform, people listen to you when you speak, and it is in those individual interactions that we can create change. So what would you say to people who might not fully grasp the weight of what you're saying today, and what would your message to them be?
I think my message, honestly, is we're all humans, and I think it's humanity for me that really, I think that compassion and love are something that are built into our innermost selves, and what anybody else chooses that is going to be their life or their mission is to listen and remember that everybody is just trying to get along just like the rest of us. And yeah, that's kind of, for me, what I look back on is everybody's trying to do their best to make their life work and to enjoy their time here on the planet. So awesome, John. So important to have you here today, and I thank you for that, and all my best to you and the family, and like I said, really appreciate you being here today. We will move on to Karen Trines. Karen, it's so good to see you, 2-time Scotties competitor. And some, you know, you were so candid in sharing some of your bio and some of your experiences, and we'll get into that in a second. But hello to you. How are you? What's on your mind today?
I'm great. We're 100 days out from the Paralympics. I work at Sport Canada on the Paralympic file, so a big day and sun is shining. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Karen, let's get into it. I was struck by how open you were in your sharing of your story at one of the Scotties on TSN. They're profiling all of the partners, all of the couples on the ice.
Yeah.
And there you are with your partner on the ice. at the Scotties, but you're not profiled. How did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I don't know that I even noticed it. We had been there for the week for the Scotties, and the conversation was very quiet around the fact that I was playing with my partner on the same team. It was the first time that happened, as far as we know, anyway, openly. And a friend of mine who worked for TSN actually came up to us and said, like, did you ask people to not talk about this? Because it's, it seems like it's being almost avoided. Like people are sort of skirting around it. We said, no, we put it in our media guide. We fill out a little guide ahead of time. And so she went ahead and did a little thing about us being on the same team at like a commercial break. And that kind of led to some conversation, which was great. But at the end of the week, there was this montage of all the relationships at the Scotties. There was Brett Lang was watching Jennifer Jones playing, he was watching from the stands. There were coaches that were related. There were, cousins on different teams. And that was posted. And then someone actually, a friend of mine, commented on the post saying, kind of weird that there's like a couple playing on the team and they weren't even mentioned in this montage. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess. But it was sort of the norm for the week. It felt like it just wasn't something people seemed to want to talk about, which, it is what it is, but it led to a couple of articles being written. And then of course the comment sections from those are something that everyone is told to stay away from, but it's hard to do that. And so that was sort of the first time I had a relationship that was kind of publicly put out there. My first relationship with a woman as well. And so reading those comments was a pretty, had a pretty big impact on me for sure.
Yeah, I don't read the comments. Don't we know that?
Don't read the comments, yeah.
What struck you about those comments? Because I started with sharing, just another one of these days, and I tweeted about our panel today, and I got the hate mail again. So what struck you about that? Yeah,
and what's actually interesting is there were only a few sort of negative comments. It was a small newspaper, it was a small article. There was a few negative comments, and those actually, it's kind of like, okay, well, those people are closed-minded, whatever. It is what it is. But there were so many comments that were like, why do we need to know about this? Why are they telling us who they sleep with? Why is this important to us? Like, it's none of our business. We shouldn't be asking this. And yet those same people are there. Oh, it's so great to see, the Brent Lang and Jennifer Jones, and it's so great to see all these coaches and these partners and these siblings and all that kind of stuff. And all of that was super positive. So it sort of struck a chord with me that like, we're still, this kind of don't ask, don't tell, it's fine. We just don't want to know about it. And that's kind of really stuck with me. And when we talk about, this idea of representation, you can see already the difference. I know we're going to speak with Greg next, but you can see the difference. We had Greg and John Epping playing at the Briar this year, and that was a very public thing. There was a lot of information about it. I'm sure Greg will speak about a lot of positive attention, probably some negative too, but at least it was being talked about, and you can see the difference that makes in the curling community when you have that representation. And I know we talked a little bit about some other aspects of diversity that are still lacking in curling, and when you turn on the TV and you watch a curling game, it's all white faces, but when we see gay people competing in sports, young kids see that and say, oh, that's a safe space for me. That's a place where I can be and I'd be accepted. And so we're looking for that. People are looking for that. I know you mentioned that, Devin, kind of looking and listening for those safe spaces that we can be comfortable in. So I really do think it makes a big difference, in panels like this and having open conversations with people is really starting to make a change, I think. So, yeah.
People that don't have to experience this probably have no clue, Karen, do they, about, I'm overrun with emotion and joy. It's almost a euphoric situation, not to be hyperbolic, when I see Greg and John with the rainbow flag plastered all over. Because we are looking always, it's almost like it's built into our DNA, places to feel safe and accepted and seen. And so when you say that, I get a little goosebumps because and maybe just shifting your question, because you said, nobody wanted to talk about it. Why? Because, I always find, I'm a journalist who gets into these conversations, and they can be messy. And sometimes people are afraid to, we hear often as an excuse, I would say, people saying, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, we say wrong things all the time. So that's an excuse. But what do you make of that, Karen? Nobody wanted to talk about it. And then suddenly some person did it, and then everybody, it was a hot topic item. I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking. I think, like you say, it's an excuse to say, like, it's okay what you do, in private. We just don't want to see it. We don't want to hear about it. We don't want to talk about it. I think it's an excuse. I think it's a cop-out. It's just saying that I'm not comfortable with this, and therefore I don't want to see it on my newsfeed. And so, even for me, I've gone through points in my life where I thought, well, this isn't an issue. The fact that I'm dating my teammate, whatever, it's old news, it's common. And a piece of that is because the people that I surround myself with are incredibly accepting. I've had so much support in both my curling life and non, and I've been very, very lucky. And so sometimes I think even I forget, I've got this sort of safe bubble around me. And then that was the first time that my relationship or my sexual orientation was kind of put out for people outside of my bubble to comment on. That had never happened before. And it kind of bursts your bubble when you realize it's not all this big, safe, happy space. There's people out there with views that are still very offensive and still very hurtful to people. So it was really kind of eye-opening for me that even existed so much in the world. And that's what led me to different organizations like You Can Play and to try and have a voice in this arena, because I think it's so important for people to hear that it is an important topic still. It's not, even if you think that you're completely safe and you've got, everybody is open-minded and we live in Canada where everything is great, it's not always the case. And curling in particular has always had such a, an older demographic. It has a small town demographic. And so sometimes that can lead to a little bit more homophobia and a little bit more of that issue than you see in some of the bigger, downtown Toronto clubs, for example.
It's so fascinating to hear you say, I think of it as complacency, because you're right, because we surround ourselves and our lives with people who are like-minded and supportive. And then, when I'm, for example, me personally, when I'm in that reporting space, there are still parts of me when I show up to sporting events and scrums, and I kind of shrink a little bit because I'm reminded that, this might not be a safe place. So it's a good reminder to not get complacent in that and hammering home why this still does matter, right, Karen?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I think we probably all do that in certain areas of our life. And I think once this happened, it started to cause me to rethink some of the other interactions I have in my life. And I think about it in terms of like starting a new job or going to a job interview. I will sort of hide that piece of myself a little bit because I don't know yet. Is it a safe space? Could this prevent me from getting a job? Could this prevent me from whatever? Until I know that I'm safe. And when I think you asked someone earlier, like, what can people do? One of the big things that I noticed growing up was the shift in language, even just using the word partner instead of husband or wife or something like that. Like even little tiny words like that kind of give me a cue that, oh, this person, might be more accepting, might be more open-minded. And so I think the language that is around is a big piece of it. And I don't know that, I think a lot of it is just people don't realize. They don't, if you, like you said, if you haven't had this type of experience, you don't notice, and even when we talk about, being more diverse in curling clubs, like I can say I walk into a curling club and I feel super welcome, but I can't speak for the experience of someone else. I can't speak for a BIPOC person, or a trans person. I still have a lot of privilege, despite the fact that I've, been through this one specific challenge. My experience is still very different from a lot of other people's, and whether or not I have lots of acceptance in a curling club doesn't mean it's the same thing for someone else. So the language we use and that kind of thing is very, very important, I would say.
Such a good point, Karen. I mean, I can pass as a straight white male, right? Sure. And not everybody has that luxury. So really good points. And I know Dr. Mccharles will have a lot to say about that. We're getting to him. Karen, thank you so much. Really good points, really good perspective. Thank you. We'll see you in Tokyo at the Paralympics.
Yeah.
See you there. Let's go to St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador and talk to Greg Smith. Greg, good to see you. Thanks for being here today. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm doing well. It is unbearably sunny in St. John's, which is somewhat of a shocker. So as you can see behind me, if you get distracted, that's the blinds, and they're broken.
Yeah, they're broken.
So I couldn't get them down. So if
Yeah, exactly. We'll just wait 15 minutes and the weather will change out there on the rock. Greg, we were talking about you, obviously, your second briar down, and everybody was, excited to see you. You had your first experience in Regina. What was that like? Because you made waves in the headlines in Regina. What was that experience like for you?
I mean, being at this briar, obviously, there was such a light brought on about being LGBTQ plus, and that the last time I think people might have assumed with some of the the dance moves and whatever out there, but they might have assumed and didn't really talk about it as much. But this time, I think it was great that me and John, got the picture and discussed these issues, whether it was with the media back here in St. John's or with different newspapers across the country. I think it's really important that visibility was stressed because I don't think people really understand the importance of that. Like we were saying, growing up, you don't really see people like yourself. You don't know if that's a safe place to go to. So after a lot of the media stuff was happening with that, and thank you for the platform to talk about that, people reached out and said, my son, my daughter, they're discovering who they are, and thank you for that. And I think that when we have the privilege to be known in something, whether it's sports, politics, music, business, we have to speak up, especially when we need to show who we are and what issues in our society have for us.
Greg, you're so joyful and so who you are on the ice. What you see is what you get. Was that always part of who you were? Was that difficult? Now the bright lights of TSN and the curling world are on you. Was there ever any feeling of, now maybe I need to tone down parts of who I am, who make Greg Smith all of who he is?
Well, I don't think I'd be able to do that if I tried. So that'd be pretty challenging. No, I didn't think that. And obviously I wouldn't be methodical enough to be able to try to do that anyways. But no, never. I mean, I think it was in grade 8 that was a turning point in my life. I was pretty dorky and pretty shy up until then, and that was kind of a turning point in just breaking out as being very social and outgoing and personable and whatever. So I think that was kind of a turning point, and since then I never looked back. So thank you to my teacher for giving me a solo in a music concert or whatever. Thank you.
We thank that teacher too, because you're such a gift to the game, Greg. You mentioned hearing from people. Can you tell us some of those notes that you get? And I don't know if there's one or two that really stick out to you, because I know out there on the rock, they love their curling and they love you. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about that.
I got a lovely message on Facebook from somebody talking about their son in sport and finding who they are, and now having the ability to compete at a national level and all this, and just discussing how important it was for her son to see somebody from Newfoundland and Labrador who is in sport and very open and authentic about who I am. So I'm glad that somebody, wherever they were, could get some benefit from just living authentically and doing what I do. So I'm glad that it had an impact. Obviously there was some negative things too, but it is what it is. I mean, we're not in this utopia that everybody thinks that we are in, and hopefully someday we'll live in a more open and diverse and inclusive world.
That is why we keep having these conversations. And I know you're not going anywhere, and all of us on this panel aren't going anywhere. And so, Greg, it's great to see you today. Thank you for doing what you do, and more than anything, being who you are in all the parts of your life and showing up fully to the Briar. We need that. So thank you. Awesome stuff, Greg.
Thanks.
Let's go from the Rock to Sacramento, California, and check in with Laura Lanetta. Laura, as she looks for that unmute button. That's been the
Yep.
story of all of our lives for 14 months. It's good to see you, Laura. How are you?
Thank you.
What are you thinking about today?
Mainly for our club, what I'm thinking of, because I've always been very lucky in my life and in curling, very welcoming. I guess the only thing that's ever really happened to me is people will ask if my husband curls, to which I say, if I'm feeling chuckly, I'll say no, and neither does my wife, or something to that effect. But we have had a very nice little situation in Roseville. But the negative to that is it's out in the suburbs. So we don't have it doesn't really reflect Sacramento, which is a very diverse city. So one of our initiatives, once we open up again, is to get out to the different communities in Sacramento, tell them where we are, who we are. I think curling's a perfect sport for that.
Laura, we've known each other a very short time, but in the short time, I get the sense that you are somebody who is courageous, not afraid to speak their mind, and speak truth to power. So you mentioned your little pushback when somebody asks you about your husband. What other ways can we change and evolve the conversation? Because it seems like you're ready to take it up down there and you know, try and affect change where you are. So how can we do that?
Well, I've always thought the principle of first opportunity is really important. If someone says something that you think, oh, that's not right, don't wait, address it immediately. And I think that's been in our curling club. I've had to more than a couple of times straighten people out about a couple of female curlers that we have. No, they are not sisters. Repeatedly, no, they are not sisters. And getting people to realize that their little bubble of who they think our society is, it's hard. And I actually think that's the hardest thing, is trying to get people who are outside of our happy little bubble, which I feel like I'm in one, how to encourage them to be accepting, and vice versa. We can all be allies to someone. And I think, you know, that's a struggle, I think.
You fell in love at the same time I fell in love with this sport in '98 during the Olympics, when Sandra and our Saskatchewan team took on the world. And that's when you fell in love with curling. What is it, though, because it's been a long love affair you've had with curling, what is it about this sport? I think you've touched on the community of it, but what is it, and why do you believe in it so much, about being a place where we can affect change and welcome people of all stripes into the club?
Well, it's so collegial. That's my main love for it, on and off the ice. But I think since anyone can play, really anyone, no matter how old, how young, anybody can get out there. So I think as far as intersectionality, addressing all of those things, the curling rink and post curling socializing is perfect. We struggle a little bit because we're an arena club, so we don't have any place that, you know, we struggle with ice time anyway. And then we struggle with having a place where people can meet when they're not on the ice.
Right. And you continue that work down there. What's you mentioned the happy little bubble you're in. And you, lastly, before we get to Dr. Mccharles, can you tell us a little bit that happy little bubble and what you want to do to make that bubble expand? I get a little triggered when I say bubble at this point of COVID coverage, but what can be done better there, Laura, in your eyes? And it sounds like you're sort of inspired from this conversation today and ready to get out there. So maybe on that, we'll leave it at that to take it away, Laura. Final thoughts on what you hope to do down there.
Well, we have our committee that is part of the Icebreakers, which is a U.S. curling initiative. And we're just biting at the bit to get started. And apparently June 15th will be opening California for semi-normal operations. So we're ready to jump in with both feet, both hands, everything. So hopefully we can get most of the population of Central City out to Roseville. So
I like it. Ambitious. I like it. I
Yeah.
will be checking in with you, Laura. It's so good to meet you. And thank you for being here today.
thank you.
All right, I'm cognizant of the time, so we're going to get to Dr. Jeff Mccharles. You know, we joked about this being an hour, Jeff, and here we are over an hour, but really happy to have you here today. As assistant professor at Michigan State University, you teach sport admin courses in the graduate program in sport coaching and leadership. And I want to pick up and get right to the heart of the matter, Jeff, because I saw you sort of perk up when you heard about how this affects workspaces and sport and passing and covering up parts of who we are. So when you hear that, Jeff, what sort of comes up for you?
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting time right now, especially in the United States, where people seem to think that, you know, we have had same-sex marriage has been legal in this country for a number of years. Last year, there was a big Supreme Court ruling that said that you couldn't discriminate against people just for being LGBTQ in the workplace. However, even though there's those, you know, sort of changes in that overt expression of discrimination, we still have these more covert, nuanced forms of discrimination. And so that's where that covering and passing really comes into play. And what we see a lot is this conditional inclusion, which a number of people have touched on today, which is this idea of, well, you can be gay, but just not really that gay. And we have research in the sport coaching literature that looks at, you know, parents who are assessing coaches of their kids who are LGBTQ and saying, well, I don't mind that they're gay as long as they don't talk about it in front of my kids or anything like that. So that's this extra level of where people in the LGBTQ community cannot bring their authentic selves in every space all the time. And that is exclusionary if we can't do that. And the other thing that I think people forget is that, and people have touched on this today as well, is that those of us, you know, that are sexual minorities, that are in the LGBTQ community, we're coming out every day, all the time, in different scenarios, in different environments. When I go to dinner with my husband here in the suburbs of Detroit, and people ask us if we want separate checks, you know, that's sort of a signal that, oh, well, they wouldn't think that we were together, that we were married, we're both wearing matching wedding rings or things like that, and people might not notice. But so just because we've seen these great advances, which are wonderful to see in terms of legal protections, it doesn't mean that people's attitudes have all changed. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that especially in spaces that are very heteronormative like sport, that we're going to have those people that have those sort of views of that conditional inclusion. Well, you know, it's okay that you're here, but just don't talk about it. Or, you know, so does that mean that I can't talk about my husband in the curling club? Or does that mean I can't talk about, you know, those sorts of things in this space? So we all have to be aware of the fact that, yes, we are making tremendous strides, but we still have such a huge way to go.
We've heard forgetting about the humanity within people a lot in this conversation today, Jeff. What do you think the toll is? You know, whenever I talk to athletes who have had to hide their sexuality, they talk about how it affects their performance. And I think about how not being able to show up in your workplaces or in heteronormative spaces like sport, how that affects who we are in life. It wreaks havoc. The stress, Elena talked about it. What do you think the toll is? It's not a tangible thing. We can't really quantify it, but there's such a toll. I'm sure you've heard a number of stories.
Oh, definitely. In my research in the, particularly, I particularly look at gay men who work in sport. It's an under studied area. A lot of people have studied lesbians that work in sport, but there's less about gay men. And they sort of, a lot of times people have this idea that, you know, we definitely do have this privilege because we're men in that environment, but then, you know, we have this stigmatized identity as well that creates sort of these different issues that people have to deal with. But I think just more broadly in thinking about how not being able to be your authentic self in the workplace or in any space really affects your, again, as Elena alluded to earlier, your mental health, which is going to impact your performance. Whether you're an athlete or whether you're an employee, it's going to affect the way that you get work done. There's research out there that shows that both diverse and inclusive, so not just diverse environments, because diversity has to be coupled with inclusion, or else you're just opening up a whole number of different cans of worms there. If you just throw a bunch of different people into a space and don't make it inclusive for them, that could create a number of greater issues. So when you have, especially in sport organizations that are diverse and coupled with a very inclusive strategy overall, you do see that they actually do better performance-wise. So sometimes you have to take that conversation to stakeholders in these, especially very heteronormative industries or very homogeneous industries, just in general, talking about racial diversity and gender diversity as well. But you have to take that argument to those stakeholders and those key leaders and say, diversity and inclusion is good for business, and you will have more productive employees as a result, because they're going to show up at work knowing that they feel valued and knowing that they can be, again, bring their full selves, have their voices heard and contribute. And that's going to be better for everybody going forward, including the organization. And most organizational leaders I know, we have some on this panel right now, would be thrilled to hear that they can get more out of their employees if they just can create these more inclusive spaces.
Sad that it has to come down to economics, but sometimes that's how the message has to get across. Some beautiful notes here in the chat that I want to put to you, Jeff, about lounge chatter. How many of us have been in the lounge and heard the discrimination, and you shrink a little bit and you kind of steer away, or that it can be a conversation stopper if you talk about my boyfriend or your husband. How do we push through that? I mean, it can be a gross experience to have to sit through and live through.
Yeah, and I think, you can look at it through the lens of the stigmatized person who is listening to it and then having to, sort of process that in the moment. And like I said earlier, those of us that are sexual minorities are coming out all the time. And that might be an example of where, in your mind, you're then having to process, well, how do I deal with this? And do I challenge them, or do I sort of, can I go forward and sort of, push back on them, like Laura said, and sort of maybe make, a little bit of a joke of it if you're comfortable with that. Or for some people, like you say, they sort of slink into their seats and they just, feel like they can't, sort of form a response to that. And I think that's where it's really important for those allies in the room, both in this virtual webinar and those around, to be able to recognize those situations and those, intercepting those things as an ally can be very, that can be stressful for them too. And they may not be sure of exactly how to do that in a tactful way and in a way that, also doesn't offend the person who's stigmatized or something like that. So it can be a delicate balance, but I think that the more people we have coming to webinars like this, listening, doing the things like John said about, meeting with people who are of these stigmatized backgrounds and hearing about those experiences and asking the questions, the more those sort of informal lounge conversations that are very uncomfortable, the more that people can start to steer those away from those uncomfortable topics. So it's all about learning and educating. And, what we're doing today is just one big part of that.
All right, let's leave it with a last question for you, a big one, a lofty one, because I think we can all agree we love this sport. We've always felt that it's inclusive, but we also know that there's a lot of work to be done. How hopeful are you how hopeful are you, Jeff, when we think and reflect on a day like today, where this conversation is in the spotlight more than normal, although a lot of us live this every day? How hopeful are you that curling can be a leader in this space? Because there is a lot of good work that's being done.
Oh, for sure. And I think that, this organization that Monica, Sarah, and Raju has started is, just one of many that are out there that are trying to do this work. And there are governing bodies like Curling Canada and the World Curling Federation that have made this a strategic priority, which is obviously a huge step, and that has to occur at these top levels of the sport. But as many people have mentioned today, We need to be seeing it at the grassroots. We need to be seeing it in our curling clubs as well. We need to be taking that approach. A big part of that, and I think that many organizations are trying to do this, and this is a lot of what I do in my work, is trying to get more diverse voices at the table in leadership positions in these curling organizations or in local curling clubs, because that's important representation to have, and they also can be that voice at the table that can really shift the conversation and drive it even farther. We have come a tremendous way. I mean, Devin, I was kind of like you, I was closeted for most of my curling career. I was a Nova Scotia high school mixed champion. That's my claim to fame in senior year of high school, grade 12. But when I think about being at the curling club, at the Mayflower Curling Club in Halifax, and curling with my dad, my uncle, and my cousin in a league, and the league after us was actually an LGBT curling league, and this would have been in like the late 2000s. And I remember coming off the ice and watching these people go on, and I was closeted at the time, and I'm there with my dad and my uncle and my cousin. But I'm kind of watching in the corner of my eye thinking, wow, like that's actually really cool that they have that. And so to be able to have those leagues and to bring them into the club, sort of to get them in the door, Catherine talked about getting them in the door. How do we get them in the door? And that's a great way to do it. But we want those people to become full-fledged members of the club too, and to be on boards and to make decisions and to become leaders. And so we need to work at embracing all of that. And curling has come such a long way. And again, we have a Canadian Gay Curling Championship. I know that they have that in Canada. We're seeing other Curl DC does a lot of LGBTQ curling work here in the United States. And so it's all popping up, and things are really moving along, but we definitely still have a long way to go. We need everybody's voice that is in this room today, and that is also watching the recording, to really sort of step up and be those allies, be those people that push their organizations to change for the better, and to just make ourselves more inclusive overall for everyone that wants to be involved in curling, because it is such a great sport. It's so social. It's a perfect place to bring in people with diverse backgrounds and diverse voices, and we really need to celebrate that.
Beautiful summation, outstanding stuff, Jeff, and all of you. You've inspired me today. Really, really good conversation. Do we have a curling update? What are the scores? Are the mixed doubles world championship underway as everybody looks for their scores? Listen, so honored and humbled to be a part of this. Again, I started by thanking Sarah and Monica and Raju for putting this together. I'm seeing 4-0, 4-2 Spain. Okay, thank you, Kathy. We're getting the updates. I can't be tweeting over to you guys for the live updates, but listen, really good stuff on putting this on today, an important conversation, and the panelists. Thank you, all of you guys. I think we all learned something, and I think we can all go away from this and have our own individual conversations and keep the pressure up. I certainly, in my privileged position as a reporter who cares deeply about this sport and this game, will do my part. And I know everybody on this panel and watching here today will continue to do theirs. So thank you for taking the time, panelists. Wonderful to be with all of you today. And to the attendees, thank you for tuning in today. And as always, good luck and good curling. And make sure to do your part wherever you are to continue to make this game we love more inclusive, diverse, and equal for all who love it. Thanks, guys.